I blacked out at my own book club. That's how it started. Or rather, that's how I finally admitted something was wrong. It was a Wednesday in October. The kind of evening where the leaves had just started to turn, and the air had that particular sharpness that makes you feel like the world is about to change. My husband had arranged everything: the cheese board, the wine, the little cloth napkins folded into triangles, the way his mother had taught him. He always did things like that. Small, careful gestures that made me feel grateful and somehow, simultaneously uneasy. I remember standing at the kitchen counter watching him pour Malbec into 7 glasses and thinking, this is a good life. I had worked hard for it. We both had. We'd been married 4 years, bought the house in Raleigh 2 years after that, and I'd finally gotten the tenure track position at the middle school where I'd been substitute teaching since I was 26. My husband was a pharmacist, a good one, the kind patients asked for by name. I thought about all of that while I watched him pour the wine. He set one glass slightly apart from the others. Mine, he said. He'd picked it specifically, a deeper pour, because he knew I liked it that way. 3 hours later, I woke up on the couch with a throw blanket tucked around me and 6 women looking at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. My husband was crouched beside me, palm cool against my forehead. He said I'd fallen asleep mid-sentence. He said it with a kind of tender embarrassment, like I was a child who dozed off at a dinner party. I laughed it off. I blamed the week I'd had, the parent-teacher conferences, the grant application, the insomnia that had been trailing me since August. But it had happened before. That was the part I kept folding back into myself, pressing flat, refusing to look at directly. It had happened at my sister-in-law's birthday dinner in July. It had happened at our neighbor's 4th of July cookout. It had happened at my own 32nd birthday party, and I'd woken up to find the guests mostly gone and my husband explaining gently that I'd overdone it. I didn't drink to excess. I'd never drunk to excess in my life, but I kept waking up on couches I didn't remember sitting down on, in rooms that had rearranged themselves while I was absent from them. My doctor ran blood work twice, both times normal. She suggested stress. She suggested iron. She suggested I try cutting back on alcohol, which stung because I'd already started nursing a single glass through entire evenings, terrified of what was happening to me. I didn't tell my husband that part. I don't know why. Or maybe I do know, and I still can't say it plainly. The November book club came around. Same house, same 7 women, same Malbec. My husband set out the glasses again. I watched him, and this time I made a decision so small it barely registered as a decision at all. I switched my glass with the one next to it when he went to get the cheese from the refrigerator. I don't know what I expected. Nothing, probably. I expected nothing. I drank 2 glasses that evening. I laughed at the right moments. I stayed sharp and present all the way through to when the last guest hugged me at the door at 10:15. And when I closed the door and turned around, my husband was standing in the kitchen looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. He recovered quickly. He said he was glad I'd had a good time. He kissed me on the cheek and said he was tired and went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about every dinner party, every gathering, every occasion where I'd woken up somewhere I hadn't chosen to be. I thought about the glass he always set apart, the pour that was always just a little deeper. I got up at 4 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and typed things into search engines I never thought I'd search. I didn't find a diagnosis. I found something worse, a pattern I recognized. I started paying attention differently after that. I watched the way he moved around the kitchen during our dinner parties. I watched his hands. I watched the particular moment, so fast it was almost nothing, when he would place my glass on the counter and turn away. I started to see what I hadn't let myself see before. There was always a half second where his back was to me and my glass was behind him, and then he'd turn around and hand it to me with a smile. I didn't say anything. I was afraid of what would happen if I was right. I was more afraid of what it would mean about the last 4 years of my life. In December, I called my college roommate. She lives in Austin now, teaches kinesiology, has 2 kids, and a husband who coaches high school soccer. She is the most grounded person I have ever known, and she is the only person I told. She didn't say I was crazy. She didn't say I was being dramatic. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you actually know about his finances?" I didn't know what that had to do with anything. She explained it to me slowly, the way you explain something to someone who doesn't want to understand. I started looking that same night. I want to be clear, I am not a suspicious person by nature. I had never gone through his things. I had never questioned his explanations for anything. I had trusted him the way you trust the floor under your feet, without thinking about it, because the alternative is too exhausting to consider. His home office was unlocked. His filing cabinet was not, but I knew where he kept the key because I'd seen him open it 100 times without registering that I was seeing it. Second drawer of his desk, under the box of staples. The first thing I found was a life insurance policy. My name on it, $2 million. Taken out 11 months ago. The second thing I found was a savings account statement I'd never seen before, an account in his name only, with a balance that didn't make sense given our shared finances, monthly transfers, regular, from somewhere I didn't recognize. I sat on the floor of his office for a long time. Then I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it, locked the cabinet, put the key back under the staples, and went upstairs and lay down next to my husband and stared at the ceiling until morning. I had a student, past tense now, whose mother is a private investigator. I'd met her at a school fundraiser 2 years before, and we talked for almost an hour because she was funny and direct, and we'd both grown up in the same part of Ohio. I still had her card. I texted her from the school parking lot the next afternoon. I said I needed help, and I didn't know who else to ask. She called me back in 4 minutes. She told me she could help, but she needed me to understand something first. If I was right, I needed to not let him know I was right. Not yet. Not until we knew everything. I asked her how long. She said as long as it takes. It took 6 weeks. What she found was this. My husband had a colleague at the pharmacy, a man I'd met maybe 3 times at work events. Quiet. Forgettable in the particular way that some people are forgettable because they work at it. According to financial records my investigator obtained legally through channels I didn't entirely understand, this man and my husband had been transferring money between accounts for the better part of 2 years. The pattern suggested they were waiting for something, building toward something. The life insurance policy had a clause. If I died within the first 2 years of the policy being active, there would be an investigation. Standard practice. The policy was 11 months old. My investigator explained this to me over coffee at a place downtown that I'd chosen specifically because my husband never went there. She laid it out calmly, with the same effect she probably used to tell other clients other terrible things about their lives. She said, "They're not ready yet. They're waiting for the policy to age. They have about 13 months left." I sat with that number. 13 months. I asked her what I should do. She said that was my decision. But if I wanted to build a real case, one that would hold in court, one that wouldn't fall apart because of how the evidence was gathered, I needed to give her a little more time. She'd been working with a contact at the Raleigh Police Department, a detective who handled exactly this kind of case. She wanted to bring him in. I said yes. I went home and made dinner and sat across from my husband and talked about his day and mine and watched a documentary about the national parks and went to bed. I did that for 3 more weeks. The hardest part wasn't the fear I could compartmentalize. I'd been doing it for months without knowing what I was compartmentalizing. The hardest part was the grief. I kept grieving in small, quiet ways the person I'd thought I was married to, the man who folded the napkins into triangles, the man who knew I liked a deeper pour. I kept having to remind myself what that knowledge had actually been in service of. My investigator called me on a Tuesday morning in January while I was between second and third period. She said they had enough. She said the detective was ready to move. She asked me to do one more thing. She needed me to record a conversation. I want to be careful here about what I say and don't say, because the case is still something that exists in the world with legal dimensions I'm not qualified to navigate in public. What I will say is this. There are legal provisions in North Carolina for one-party consent recording. I was the one party. I knew what I was doing, and I made sure I understood the rules before I did it. I chose a Sunday evening. His colleague was coming for dinner, which happened occasionally, which I had always found slightly strange and had told myself was because I was an introvert who found his colleague slightly boring. I made pasta. I opened wine. I set the table and I put my phone in my cardigan pocket and pressed record before I went to the kitchen to check on the water. Over dinner, I mentioned carefully that I'd been feeling strange again lately. Tired, dizzy. I said it the way I'd learned to say things in those months, lightly, casually, the way someone says a thing that doesn't mean anything to them. The look that passed between them was brief. I saw it because I was watching for it, and because I had spent months learning to watch for things. After dinner, I excused myself to check on something upstairs. I didn't check on anything. I stood in the hallway and listened, and my phone was still recording, and what I heard was enough. It was more than enough. I texted my investigator from the bathroom. She texted back 2 words, "We're ready." I went back downstairs. I poured more wine. I smiled at the right moments. At 9 o'clock, his colleague said goodnight, and I hugged him at the door and closed it behind him. And then I turned around, and there was my husband in the kitchen, and I looked at him for a long moment, and I said, "I know." He didn't ask what I meant. That told me everything I needed to know about what he'd known. The next 48 hours are something I'll probably spend years learning how to describe. The detective my investigator had been working with, I'll call him what he was, which was methodical and careful and good at his job, executed a search warrant on our home the following morning while my husband was at work. They found what they needed in the home office. They found more of what they needed on his laptop. His colleague's apartment was searched the same morning. My husband was arrested in the pharmacy parking lot at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. I know this because my investigator called me as it was happening, and I was sitting in my car in the school parking lot, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried in months, maybe years, in a way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the particular relief of being right about something terrible. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit murder, criminal poisoning, insurance fraud. His colleague faced the same charges, plus additional counts related to obtaining controlled substances under false pretenses. It turned out his access to the pharmacy inventory had been very specifically useful in ways that the investigators were better equipped than I am to explain. My attorney. I had an attorney by then. I had assembled a small team of people who were very good at their jobs. Told me the civil case against my husband would likely settle before trial. It did. Without going into specifics that are bound by agreement, I will say that I am not in a difficult financial position. The criminal case is still moving through the system. These things take time. I've learned to make peace with how much time they take. His mother called me once, 3 weeks after the arrest. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was long and confused and seemed to be searching for a version of events that would make her son something other than what he was. I understood the impulse. I had spent months searching for the same thing. I didn't call her back. My sister-in-law, his sister, called me the following week. That call I took because I'd always liked her and because she deserved to not be ignored. She cried. I let her. She said she didn't know, and I believe her. She said she was sorry, and I believe that too. We don't talk often now, but we talk sometimes, and I think that's the right amount. I left the Raleigh house in March. I loved that house, actually. The yard, the crown molding in the dining room, the way the light came in through the kitchen window in the early afternoon. I grieved it the way I'd been grieving everything, in pieces, over time, without letting it stop me from moving. I'm in Charlotte now. Different city, similar climate, new job at a school that has a better union and a principal who actually responds to emails. My apartment has a small balcony where I drink my morning coffee and watch the street below get started on its day. I bought a nice coffee maker with money that is mine, which turns out to be a feeling you can't really explain to someone who hasn't lost track of it. My college roommate came to visit in April. We sat on the balcony and she asked me how I was, really, and I told her the truth. I was better than I'd expected. I was angrier than I'd expected. I was more myself than I'd been in 4 years, maybe longer. She nodded like that made sense. She's good at that, letting things make sense without making a performance of understanding them. I still think about the October evening sometimes. The book club, the wine, the glass I switched when he went to get the cheese. Such a small decision. I made it almost by accident, more out of a vague, unexamined anxiety than any real conviction that I was right about what I suspected. I wasn't ready to be right. I don't think I would have chosen to be right if choosing had been an option, but I switched the glass anyway. And then I stayed awake through the whole evening, all the way to 10:15 when the last guest left, and when I turned around and saw his face. That brief, strange expression that came and went before he could decide how to look at me, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. He had been counting on me not to switch the glass. He had been counting on me to be exactly who he'd spent 4 years carefully arranging me into. Tired, confused, grateful for the deeper pull. The thing about being underestimated is that it works, until it doesn't. I teach a unit every year on persuasive writing. I tell my students that the most important thing you can learn is how to notice the difference between someone explaining something to you and someone deciding something for you. I used to think that was a lesson about rhetoric. I still drink wine sometimes. Good wine, the kind I choose myself, poured into a glass I set on the table with my own hands. I drink it slowly, and I taste it, and I stay exactly as awake as I decide to be. I keep coming back to that October evening, the cheese board, the folded napkins, the glass set slightly apart from the others with the deeper pour he knew I liked. That detail, the deeper pour, is the one that stays with me longest because it was true. He did know I liked it that way. He had paid attention to me carefully over years, and he had used everything he learned. That's not a small thing to sit with. It means the version of him I loved was assembled from real observations, real moments. It just wasn't built for the reason I thought it was. There's a version of this story where I never switched the glass, where I keep waking up on couches I don't remember sitting down on, keep apologizing for being tired, keep believing the problem is me. I almost lived that version. I was close enough to it that I can feel its edges when I think about it too carefully. What saved me wasn't courage, not at first. It was something quieter. A small, stubborn refusal to stop asking why, not out loud. Just internally, in the part of me that kept filing things away even when I wasn't ready to look at them. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to see clearly when someone you trust is working very hard to keep you from seeing. The answer, I think, is not dramatic. It's not a single brave moment. It's more like staying honest with yourself even when honesty is inconvenient. Noticing the things you notice and not immediately talking yourself out of them. Trusting your own perception even when someone you love is gently, consistently telling you that your perception is wrong. That's harder than it sounds. It took me months of practice, and I was doing it without knowing I was doing it. What I know now is that intelligence isn't just about being smart in the abstract, it's about being willing to follow a thought all the way to its conclusion, even when the conclusion is something you'd give almost anything not to find. I followed it. My college roommate helped me follow it. One question, asked calmly over the phone, aimed at exactly the right thing. The private investigator followed it with me. The detective followed it to its end. None of us flinched from what we found, even when what we found was ugly and strange and required us to hold a lot of difficult information at once. And then there was the part that came after the arrest. The part nobody really tells you about, which is that surviving something like this doesn't feel like victory, not cleanly. It feels like loss and relief braided together, and some days you can't tell which is which. You grieve the life you thought you had. You grieve the person you thought you knew. You do that while also moving, signing papers, finding an apartment, answering your attorney's emails, showing up to teach 32 12-year-olds who need you to be present regardless of what is happening in your personal life. That part. The showing up, the continuing, the building of something new in the space where the old thing used to be, that took more out of me than any single moment of the investigation. It's ongoing, it probably will be for a while, but I'm doing it, and I think that matters. I poured my own coffee this morning and stood on my balcony and watched the street and thought, this is a good life. I mean it differently now than I used to. I mean it the way you mean something you chose, clearly, with full information after everything. That feels like enough.